Welcome to Underwater CSI International Revealed. I'm your host, Senior Investigator Rich Morin, and with me as always is,
I'm your co host, Senior Investigator Ed Myron.
and tonight we also have a special guest. We got Master Scuba Diver Trainer John Osborne. John, how you doing tonight?
Doing well tonight.
Good. I like your shark shirt.
I was just going to say, that's a good looking shirt, John.
Yeah. John is a fellow shark instructor and a fellow shark feeder. Um, yeah, so he did the shark feeding course down at Stewart Coves, down in the Bahamas, and so big shark enthusiast, as you can see in the picture in his background there. His head's blocking it though. There's another shot of a shark, in the background right there. But so tonight is going to be part two of the tour boat tragedy, the one that occurred on October 2nd, 2005, the Ethan Allen, which claimed the lives of 20 people. A senior citizen group out of Michigan that was leaf peeping, on a bus tour along the eastern states. And, one of the things they were doing is taking an excursion on a tour boat. And unfortunately, disaster happened and 20 people lost their lives. So last show, we were talking about basically what happened, what we witnessed as far as the rollover goes versus what the official story is. The official story has it rolling to the port side. And we're going to discuss, our findings, et cetera. Plus, we were eyewitnesses, things like this. But the evidence that we found underwater, doing the investigative part that we did and the forensics investigation that we did, I think will convince a lot of people that, it indeed rolled over to the starboard side.
Right.
The other thing is we have an aerial shot, and the boat, if it had been affected by this mysterious 5-foot wave, the boat would have been being pushed into shore and not going further out, because when it eventually went down, and because it was bow heavy, it went down like this instead of straight down
Right.
on that. So, and you'll see where it ended. So there's a lot of things that we're going to talk about that hopefully will, convince people that, hey, you know what, maybe it didn't quite happen the way that it was reported.
Right.
So, but anyway, are we ready to roll, guys?
Yeah.
All right.
John,
So
you
last
good?
show, I think we were talking about, we were actually extracting victims, myself and another instructor. We were dropping down. I was going in through the port side window midship. He was going in through the starboard side midship. John and his team of two other people were on the surface, and they had a gruesome job up there helping to get survivors into pleasure boats, and also collecting victims. We had 6 dead on the surface, and we had 14 that were still missing. We didn't know at the time. We had no idea how many people were on board. We had no idea how many victims we had. We had no idea, if there were people that had fallen out of the boat and were away from the boat once it eventually sank, et cetera. But what had happened, though, is after the boat capsized, it was upside down. The bow started to sink. A lot of air was still trapped in that helm area, which is fiberglass, slowly leaking, but enough to keep it up out of the water, the stern, about 4 feet or so. So it's slowly starting to go down. That gave us time to extract some victims at that point. In the vessel itself, I just want to kind of review a few things. When we first went in, I went in through port side. The other instructor came in through starboard side. We encountered 2 gentlemen up against the ceiling, and their legs were crisscrossed like this. So I grabbed the one that was closest to me. The other instructor grabbed the other victim. Before bringing him out, I just took a second to look, and I saw 2 more victims on the port side. One sitting on the deck with his back up against the bench seat. They were all park-style benches, all bolted to the floor, with an aisle going down the middle. So the benches were like this, going down the boat, and up toward the bow where it curves in, there's a bench seat this way instead of
Right.
this way.
Yep.
Okay. So anyway, so we extracted him. We brought him up to the surface, gave some direction, now that we had an idea of what was going on, to the team topside. Also, the New York State Police patrol boat was there. Rich Kober, who did an amazing job. Their team topside, they were taking a lot of time to put bodies, not a lot of time, but they were putting bodies into Rich's boat, New York State Police. Anyway, we went down and extracted the next 2. I took care of mine on the port side. The other instructor had multiple people on the starboard side. Afterwards, when we went down, see, this will be the fourth time now going back down. Everybody else, so we have 9 people now on the starboard side, and most of them were trapped underneath the benches.
Yeah.
So
So
how did they?
explain why that's important.
Well, I wasn't going to quite go there yet, but
Okay.
the windows folded up and they hooked in. It was a beautiful day in October. It was white puffy clouds, very, very little wind. I mean, wasn't even really a ripple on the water. It was flat calm. Um, the uh, when the boat capsized, right, and as it started to capsize, it went into the water first, like this submarine did, and kicked back up. We talked about that last show.
Right.
We heard the prop, wow, 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 and it came back down. We believe that the pilot at that point possibly panicked, went hard to port, which everybody would. If you drive your car down the road and you go to the right and then make a hard left, you roll to the right, right? So, you make the right, go a hard left. So he's making a right hand turn on a full throttle, and then stuff happens, back hits, he panics and goes hard to port, and next thing you know, the boat starts to capsize to the right side. Now, the reason that we're saying this is because the windows on the right side, which is the starboard side, if you're in the boat facing the front of the boat, which is the bow, the starboard side windows, we found the hooks, the eyelets that when the windows came up, they hooked into these eyelets. We found those ripped out of the ceiling. How does that happen? Okay, and these windows are down. On the port side, we didn't have any of that happening. So you can imagine as the boat's starting to roll, right? People are starting to slide. They're losing their balance. They're trying to slide because it's no longer a level surface now.
Right.
They're looking for something to hold on to. And one of the things that I did when I was given my deposition and in court, I said, okay, if somebody comes up behind you and they push you hard enough, you're not expecting it. They push you hard enough to where you're going to fall on your face. Where are you going to put your hands?
Yeah.
Everyone's going to put them out in front of you to
Yep.
protect yourself,
Right.
right, as you're going down. Would anybody go like this
Yeah.
and allow them to hit the face on the ground? No, no, no. It just wouldn't happen,
Right.
right? So my theory is, as people were sliding down the deck, they're looking for something to grab onto. And the window happened to be right there, the edge of the window. So they're grabbing onto the window, but the boat continues to capsize. Their feet are going underneath the benches. They're holding onto it, and the weight of their body is ripping the hooks out of the ceiling, and they slide underneath the benches.
Yeah.
Because again, we had 9 people on that starboard side.
Yeah.
And the majority of those, I think 7 of them were underneath the benches. Right. And there's still one more victim that we haven't talked about in order to make up our 14. We'll talk about her in just a little bit. So it made it a little bit more tricky. We made a couple more excursions on it. I think we had a total of 5 people left that we ended up recovering. I think 6 total. So we had brought 8 people up so far. And when we were in the vessel, all of a sudden the rest of the air came out of the helm area. Not all of it, but enough to where the boat is sinking now. It's going to the bottom.
Right.
We happened to be inside of it. And the reason we knew we were going to the bottom is because we could feel the pressure changes and we have to equalize. So we're equalizing our ears as we're going down. And I'm just praying that we're going to hit 60 feet or less because we had already done a 60-foot dive. And we want to make sure that you do your deepest dive of the day first, your deepest part of your dive first, and each successive dive to equal or shallower depth. So I was hoping that we weren't too far out because a little further out, once you clear that point, it gets to be about 93 feet of water out there.
Right.
So we ended up hitting the bottom at 59 feet.
And what's important for people to note is that you've been doing a repetitive up and down with the victims, handing them off to John and his team. Yes, they were down around 20 feet, but you're still coming up to hand those victims off to John and his team.
Right.
So
they figured out, hey, you know what? We got to make this safer for the dive team down below.
Right.
And so they started dropping down so that we didn't have to come up past the safety stop area. We
Right.
normally do our safety stops between 15 and 20, 20 kind of being preferred mid chest level. Well, if we got to come all the way to the surface with a victim, we're not
Right.
going to stop and take 3 to 5 minutes every single time we're coming up. So
Right.
they dropped down, kind of read our minds really, and just, helped us out tremendously. We grabbed the victims and we didn't even have to come all the way up to 20. We started holding victims by their ankles and kind of pushing them up a little bit. And then John and his team, they would grab onto them at that point and continue to go up to the surface with them.
Right.
And
And
then,
and another point is there's a lot of physical exertion, right? Because
oh,
you're
absolutely.
yeah, so you're exerting an awful lot of energy and you've made multiple trips up and down, and now the vessel's on the bottom at 59 feet of water.
Right.
So
John, give us an idea of what was going on topside now as far as boat traffic goes and what you guys were what you guys were dealing with. Because again, I wasn't there. I was underwater. You were the heroes topside.
The boat traffic was definitely picking up at that point. They were starting to bring the survivors and some of the bodies back to shore.
Yeah, they had set
The
up a
other thing
state.
is we were trying to kind of go more at a diagonal from the 20 feet up to the boat and kind of try to stay out of any camera eyes
Yep.
and be on the side of the boat that was away from the shore.
Oh, good
mm,
thinking. Yeah, because that shoreline started to get pretty busy with camera crews. The road leading into Kramer Point, the police had closed it off. Emergency personnel only. And so the camera crews were working their way through people's yards and through the woods and stuff and setting up along the shoreline. They even went in through the state park and headed north from there and started setting up cameras all along the shoreline. And we had multiple helicopters up in the sky. So
yeah.
there was a lot of that going on. What
So
about
oh,
recreational boats, John?
yeah, I was just going to ask that same question.
There was quite a few that were coming around, kind of like the roadside accident type gawking and stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
So
Um,
so John, you must have along with the team, you must have been starting to get a little bit anxious, right, or worried about all. Now you have pleasure boats, you have all the other teams showing up or arriving or moving around. Now you got boats bringing victims and you got boats bringing survivors. I mean, so it must have been starting to get pretty hectic for you up there, right?
Yeah. And you also have to remember that even though they quote stop, they're still floating too.
Right, right,
yep. Plus the exertion of just putting bodies into the boat. I mean, being being in the water, trying to do your part, pushing while the people in the boat are pulling,
right,
victims in. I mean, that's exerting in itself.
right. And something that the audience needs to really remember is that for you guys to get over there, you were dragged over by a boat in the water with
Would
all
have
your
killed
dive.
lesser men.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, but you had to be dragged over, right? Then dropped off, and then now you're going through all this type of activity. John's team on the surface, you and the other instructor underwater, and the physical and emotional exertion. I mean that you're going through. And I can only imagine, like you said, Rich, you're underwater, so you're not hearing it. John and the rest of the team is up there, and you know there's people saying, "Hey, get out of the water." Other people are saying, "Hey, what about this over here?" I
Oh,
can just imagine.
pandemonium.
Oh
Absolute
yeah, yeah,
pandemonium. It's
I
got
can
to
just
be.
imagine. So
Yeah.
John, it's a credit to you and the others that were, part of our team that didn't overreact and stayed calm, and you know you did what you had to do to make sure that people got in the vessels, and that you and the rest of the team stayed safe.
So kudos, John. All right. So anyway, so now we drop back down to remove the rest of the victims. And again, now we're in 59 feet of water.
Right.
So it's a much longer up and down, up and down. So I go ahead and I secure the next victim. And it's a little bit challenging now, though, because they're underneath benches and they're not just slid underneath. They're, kind of caught, and arms are one way and legs are between metal legs of the benches, et cetera. So we
Right.
kind of have to work people out of it. And, what you were talking about just a minute ago, Ed, was the emotional part of it. And one of the things, I've been doing this a long, long time, 4 decades now, plus. And, a lot of bodies over the years. And one of the things that I do and that I try to teach the team is that they're still people. All right.
Yep.
There's nothing to be scared about. They're people. All right. And what we do is we bring them back to their families so that the family can have closure
Right.
and treat them that way. Treat them with respect. All right. And talk to them because it makes it more human now.
Right.
Right. So we talk to the victims. For example, as we're extracting somebody out from underneath the bench, it's like, hey, what are you doing down there? Come on, let's get you out of there. Oh, you got your arm caught. Hold on a second. And so that's what we do as we're trying to extract them out. We're not
Right.
just yanking, et cetera. And, it's like a piece of luggage. No, we treat them with respect. We talk to the individuals on that, telling them that it's going to be okay. We're going to get you back to your family. Um, get you back to your loved ones, et cetera. So the last lady that we went down to extract was a very petite, small woman, and she was underneath the bench that went like this up in the bow, and her right arm and her right leg were up behind the backrest, but her head was between the metal legs of the if you're sitting in the bench to the left side,
Mm.
right, or towards the stern area. I remember these little glasses that she had on, a little design on them. And, I looked at her and I says, what are you doing in a position like this? Come on, let's get you out of there. And I took her glasses off and I set them off to the side because I've got to now push her back through those, the legs there.
Right.
And then from there, come around. And then we worked out. The other instructor was up on top, kind of guiding her leg and her arm through and extracted her that way. Then put her glasses back on and we extracted her. At that point, we decided that we were going to go down and do do a perimeter search. Because again, we don't have a clue if we got everybody. We
Right.
don't have a clue how many people.
Right.
So,
So you're gonna do a debris sweep,
well, we're actually
perimeter
looking
sweep.
for additional victims.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, topside, you mentioned it a little while ago, John. Prior to the show, we were talking a little bit. And what did you notice when we were topside when we left the vessel? You lost sight of.
Well, at one point, they were coming over and asking us to get out of the water again. And at that point, I actually lost sight of your bubbles and stuff. It was no longer coming out of the boat, and that kind of like scared me.
Yeah, because at
And
that
part of
Wondering
point,
if something was wrong at that point.
yeah,
Right. And part of that
Mhm.
reason too, John, right, was all the pleasure boats in the area, right? And some of
Yeah, I
that.
mean, you have boat traffic, so you can't see the bubbles on the surface.
Right.
Couldn't see them underwater.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like you're losing your connection
yeah.
to the
Gotcha.
rest of the team.
Yeah, sure.
So we went out to do a circular pattern. All right, actually, I'm sorry, we did a U-shaped pattern, and so we did. We went quite a ways out, looking for additional victims. But at the same time, because remember the boat went down on it like this, it didn't go
Right.
straight down. So there was a debris field that was quite long.
Yeah.
And so what we did is we, headed to the end of the debris field, did a U-shaped pattern, working our way back to the boat itself. But we also decided at that point we were going to start picking up personal effects. So we had jackets and sweaters and backpacks and cameras, and we had
Purses.
one walker, one cane. I mean, just a lot of stuff. And our arms were just full. We got back to the boat, and I told the other instructor, with hand signals, I said, I'm just going to do one more quick look on the inside. Our air is getting very low at this point from all the exertion and stuff.
Sure.
And yeah, so I found a few more personal items inside the boat that we brought out. We loaded our arms up. We came up, did a safety stop, and then eventually came to the surface. And same thing, the state police. We all this stuff went into their boat. Well, in the meantime, boats have been, like John was saying earlier, bringing victims and survivors into a staging area. You have that aerial shot?
Yeah, let me get
Ed?
you that.
Yeah,
Let
let's
me
bring that up.
get you
We
that
can point
shot.
that out. Not only was this a staging area for bringing the survivors and the victims, but we also used it the following day to set up all of our staging for the vessel recovery. Yeah, if you can move your cursor over. Yeah, that area right there. So
Right.
that area is being used as a staging area now. Lining up the deceased and waiting for transportation via ambulances and getting the victims to the hospital also so they can be checked out, et cetera. So where the barge is, Ed, can you go
Yep.
back out there and show? Yeah.
Right
So this
here.
was the following day. This was on Monday. But just to give you an idea, um, the the boat itself, the Ethan Allen, is to the right, right there, right about
Yep.
there. Where you
Yep.
a little more,
A little this way.
yeah, right around in that area, right
Okay.
there. So um, the pleasure boats, we're bringing them out and around. Now, something that I had mentioned before that I want to mention, um, Ed, if you can go back to a wider shot on that. There you go. The shoreline all the way to the left, which
Yep.
it's kind of out of the picture.
Oh yeah, over here.
Um, at the beginning of this disaster, after we had brought up our initial victims, I I I think we were on our fourth. I think we were on our fourth ascent. It was getting pretty chaotic on the surface with all the pleasure boats coming up now, and you can't blame them. They're trying to help, but there were a lot of people that were gawking. But they're unfortunately they're just coming through and right over the top of us and stuff. There were two patrol boats, and I'm not going to mention what agency they were with, but there were two patrol boats along the shoreline that were there that were told not to engage until their superior showed up on scene.
And they were here
So
along this shoreline right here,
yeah,
right?
but more out of the shot and down
Okay.
a little bit more. Yeah.
Gotcha.
There's actually a yellow camp right there, and they were right there. And you know how you see police cars periodically parked one was parked one nose one way and nose the other way, and they're
Right.
talking.
So they're
Well,
talking
that's
about it.
exactly what they were. And I had actually told the New York State Police, Rich Gover, the trooper there. I said, Richie, call those guys and get them out here, get them to engage. He's like, I've been calling them. He says they're not coming. It would have made a world of difference if we could have
Yeah.
had them out there and let's at least secure the scene, and let's get some professionalism going on out there, et cetera.
At
And
least create a perimeter.
yeah, let's create a perimeter
Right.
and, make it a safe environment for the survivors, still on the surface and, for us that are recovering the victims
Right.
on that. But we never saw them engage the entire time that we were there.
Wow.
So they never came out. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on, possibly the next show. This might be a three-parter. But I was pissed. I tell you, I was absolutely pissed. How dare they? We got the worst maritime disaster on the lake, and they're not engaging because they were given orders
Yeah.
on that point. But so anyway, and now the volunteer fire departments are showing up with their dive teams, et cetera. So we wanted to do a repetitive dive. But I started thinking about it, and I said, I'm pretty sure we've got a lot of it done. The county dive team for the sheriff's department, they were hours and hours away doing
A training
Um,
exercise, right?
training exercises with multiple departments.
Yeah.
They were out toward the Buffalo area, I think it was. I'm not positive, again, 20 years ago, but as soon as they heard about it, they were en route, but they didn't get there until like late afternoon. They ended up doing an additional, a dive once they got on scene, and they went down and actually found another victim, another lady. what had happened was the engine compartment cover had come off, right, from all the water rushing in, et cetera, the engine compartment. And this lady ended up inside the engine compartment, which is underneath the main deck, all right, and then in a little bit. So you couldn't see her from just looking in there.
Mm,
And this would have been something we would have liked to have done as far as a repetitive dive, because we would have done a much thorough search at that point. Wouldn't have been so, let's go, let's go, let's go.
right.
Um, but we're thankful. We're thankful that they were there and they were able to retrieve her that same day, because it would have been bad, having her out there overnight and not finding her till the following day. So
Right.
they did
Right.
a great job. We greatly appreciated that,
So
their
at
professional
so at
efforts.
this point, um, John, were you at this point where all the victims were extracted now, and the other dive team had shown up? Were you in the process of getting out of the water now, or what was your next steps, as far as the surface team was concerned?
Well, at this point, because Rich and them were finishing their part up, we were all looking at getting out of the water at that point.
Okay.
Again, I mean, we're hundreds of yards away from where we were training with students who are still back there waiting for us.
Right.
And we, once we were done, and just to let everybody know, from the time we descended for the very first victims, right? And we had, like I said, 14 were inside the boat. We brought up 13 of them. And, and again, some of them were at 59 feet, et cetera. Plus we did all the
The
perimeter
debris
search on
sweep.
it,
Yep.
picked up all the personal effects, et cetera, or not all, but a majority of them. To the time we got back to the surface when we were all done, total of 22 minutes.
Yeah. That's
So we did
amazing.
all that in 22 minutes. And it just it was clockwork. I mean, the surface team did exactly what, they were trained to do, and just performed flawlessly. And giving us the opportunity to not have to keep coming all the way to the surface, and, discussions, et cetera, and
Right.
getting more angry because of all the boat activity going on, et cetera.
But John, on the
So
surface, it must have felt like an eternity, right? I mean, 22 minutes, is quick, but it must have felt much longer to you guys on the surface, right? I would imagine.
It actually didn't feel very long because we were moving as fast as we could.
Oh, okay. Okay.
yeah, you
Well,
didn't have any downtime, did you?
No,
Between survivors and victims on the surface already, and then we start bringing people up. They were getting probably a little overwhelmed, but again, just performed flawlessly.
and John, again, because Rich wasn't there on the surface with you, how were the survivors? How were they acting on the surface? I mean, did you have to calm them down? Were you, what was that like with the survivors on the surface?
not so much about that, but there might have been some where they were with their other people and stuff like that, and they were looking for help and stuff like that.
Okay.
And unfortunately, at that point, it had been so long. Probably there wasn't going to be a good outcome,
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
but kind of feeling a little bit, useless in that you couldn't really help them.
Right. And that's part of the emotional strain, right? And the emotional side of it, right? I mean, uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that's a tough thing for you to deal with when you're on the surface like that.
Because you had a lot of people that were asking for help. And
Right.
there's only so many of you. You can't do it all.
Right.
Yeah. We once we got done, I told Rich Cobra from the New York State Police. I said, Rich, we'd love to do a repetitive dive, but it's getting crazy here, and I'm just concerned about my team's safety now. Somebody's going to get hit by a boat. Somebody's going to get cut by a prop.
Yeah.
there's no perimeter set up now as far as um, protecting the basically a potential crime scene,
Right.
at
Right.
that point. But so he understood, and we got Lake George Parks Commission to bring over two of their boats, and we got our guys in the two boats, and they gave us a ride back over to the state park,
Okay. That
and we
was
we went back over to the state park. We unloaded, told our students to set their gear back up, and we got back in the water and finished their training.
nice.
Everybody was asking us what was going on, what happened, what happened, what happened,
Oh, I'll bet.
and we told them that it was a unfortunate disaster, and a lot of victims, and et cetera. But we
Yeah.
didn't elaborate on it too much because they still had another dive to do.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So we got them back in the water, and I think we did a 30-foot dive. Finished up their training, their underwater skills, and stuff like that.
Right.
And then by the time we got out of there, it was a late evening, and then the sheriff's department wanted us to come in and give our reports, which we went in and did as quick as we could. We didn't elaborate on a lot of stuff because we were tired. It
I'm
was a
sure.
long day, and we also got hired by the county via the NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board, to go and um, do the
Do,
recovery of the
do the
vessel the
recovery.
following
Right.
day.
Okay.
You know, but so we'll talk about that here probably on the next show.
What the actual recovery part of it?
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Um, so it was a long day, and the NTSB, the director Mark Rosenkar showed up on Sunday late. Um, it was kind of starting to take charge type of thing. They wanted us to come and do a report also, and I was like, "There's no way, we can't. We still got to go back to the dive operation. We got to unload all this
Unload.
stuff. We got to
Right.
reload for tomorrow. We got to check equipment. We got so much to do, and
Yeah.
plus,
You got
sheriff wants us to go in and do reports, etc.
right.
And it was just getting to be too late of a night.
Where you got air fills, you got tanks to be filled, you got
Yeah,
everything. Like you said
all the
before.
recovery equipment and forensics equipment that needed to be loaded for the next day, and
Right.
so we're
Right.
ready to go. But
Right.
not only that, but what I do, and I talked about it in the first season, I think with the airplane recovery. I go back and I start researching everything now, even though it's
Right.
late. And I try to figure out, okay, what are we going to do? How can we bring this vessel up
Right.
to where we're not rigging onto the vessel, or if we do, it's as little as possible. We're not doing any additional damage. We want to leave it as a potential crime scene for investigation
Right.
because the NTSB is not coming underwater to
Nope.
do it. So they're kind of relying on us and New York State Police and the Sheriff's Department to, fill in the blanks.
Right. And
So
they want it back in in as best shape as possible.
yeah,
Right. So I mean,
yeah. So, you got to come up with a plan, and how are we going to do this? And one of the things that we don't want to do is just attempt to try to bring the boat up to where the whole thing's coming up out of the water all at once, because you got that chance of, a bag blows out or rigging comes undone. If it tips, next thing you know, it's flipping over and it's going back to the bottom again. Oh, that's going to look really good on international television,
yeah. Right.
with all the film crews and helicopters and stuff, and everybody, peering at you, wondering what you're going to do, et cetera.
And then you also have the what's that? The armchair quarterbacks, right? That are out.
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah, you guys should do it this way or that way. Oh boy.
yeah.
I remember that on so many recoveries.
Yeah, it's one thing to do a recovery. It's another thing to do a recovery if it's, a potential crime scene.
Hmm.
It's handled completely different. And the other thing is once the vessel goes up, I mean, we went back on Tuesday and we still did another perimeter search, looking for personal items that were left that were missed, et cetera, and making sure we didn't miss anything. And we found some. I think we found a couple purses still, and that were outside the area that we initially searched, and
Right.
so they must have gone over early, and turned those into the authorities, and so it's a lot of work,
Yeah.
a lot of
And
work. So next show we'll get into the meat and potato as far as Monday morning early, what it took to bring this vessel to the surface.
right. So,
Yeah,
and again, because I was out of state on another project, John, were you there for the actual recovery as well?
Yes, I was.
Okay. So we had quite a few members of the team there then for the recovery.
absolutely.
Okay.
And John, you were actually on one of the bags, right?
Yes, I was.
Yeah. Where were you on the Ethan Allen? Where were you positioned at?
On the back
Starboard side?
starboard side.
Yeah. So you're at the stern, but on the starboard side. Um, Now, were you there when we did all the rigging, or were you topside on the barge?
I was top side of the barge. We were lowering items down to you.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I couldn't quite remember who was up on the barge, and because again, we want to try to have as few people as possible, in the water, because again, this is now considered potential crime scene rather.
Right.
Um, One of the things that we did prior to anything else occurring right now, we went down on Monday morning to photograph and videotape everything on the wreck
Right.
itself. Um, but when Mark Rosenkar, when I was talking to Mark, I told him, I said, we're not going down just our team. I said, we're going to have a member of the New York State Police dive team and a member of the County Sheriff's dive team that's going to go down with us. Because one of the things that you got to do is you got to, protect your ass. You got to make sure that you don't get accused of tampering with anything at that point.
Right. And you're going to
But
point things out.
right, exactly.
Right.
And
Right.
I told Mark Rosenkar, head of the NTSB, also, I said, and when we get down there, I says we're going to find that helm area full throttle, and we're going to find the rudder hard to port. He said, no way. He said the report is that it was backed off on the throttle, and that they were in the middle of a starboard turn, so it's going to be hard to starboard. I said, I don't think so.
Yeah.
So we went down, and the first thing we did is we headed toward the stern area, away from the boat, and photographed and videotaped that particular area. And there it was, full throttle and hard to port on that, which again goes toward that starboard side rollover.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
That you could see also the rudder
yeah,
in the
that's what I
position.
meant. The rudder, yeah, yep, the rudder was over, all the way hard to port, and that. So, uh, you know, busy couple of days.
Yeah. Yep.
Man, our hearts just went out to all the victims and their families, and it was a lot of people, a lot of fire departments, eventually got there, showed up. There were still a lot of people to transport. So I mean, they all did their jobs just just fantastic.
Yeah.
You can't say enough for them. The extra dive teams that showed up, the volunteer dive teams for the fire departments, did a super job. Afterwards we were done. I mean, we were out of there. They were looking again, just making sure no other victims were left.
Right. Right.
Um, but
And again,
and then the sheriff's department showing up much later, and
right.
finding the last of the victims, thankfully.
Yeah. And again, something that, and we've talked about it in previous shows and things like that, in previous episodes. It, it it's really hard to quantify the amount of work that it takes, right, to get all the equipment ready. Like you said, you're going back, you're studying, okay, how are we going to rig this so we don't do any damage? But what it takes, the amount of lines and the amount of lift bags and the amount of tanks. I mean, some people think, oh, well, I'm just going to lift this mooring pad or this pad, and all I'm going to do is put a little bag on it and put some air in it, and it's going to right to the surface, right? But you're not, you're lifting a large vessel that's full of water, and you're bringing it to the surface. And like you said before, you want to rig it so that it stays upright in that position, that we can get it to the surface so that there's no additional damage, that we can get the gunnels out of the water so it can be pumped out. And I don't think people really understand the magnitude of the amount of gear. I mean, we showed it in one episode, the barge, if you remember, Rich, when we were doing the one episode, the amount of gear that was on that barge for the sailboat
Oh, that's
with
right. Yeah. No, no,
with
no. The hacker craft.
the hacker craft. Sorry,
Hacker craft. Yeah.
with all the tanks, with all the lift bags, with
Yeah.
all the safety equipment, all it people don't
You know what? It
understand.
multiply that by 3
Right,
because that's what we had to bring for this particular job. Plus all of our forensic stuff.
right,
I mean, just tremendous amount of gear. And we were, it was very little sleep that night. And I'm trying to pull up as many pictures as I can of this particular boat to try to find out where we could do any rigging, if anything. And
right.
we were just using cleats, just as basically supports to keep we didn't talk about it yet, but the harness from slipping
From
up.
right,
The last
sliding.
thing you want to do is, if somebody puts too much air on one side, it could
Right.
actually slip the entire harness out. Next thing you know, the boat could roll or just end up going right back down. Plus, you got divers there,
Yeah.
so it could be a lot of problems.
Well, and again, you're talking about you didn't get much sleep. Well, not just because of reloading and all the other stuff, but look at the emotional side of it. You're dealing with victims, multiple victims in the water. So how could how could you expect, okay, we've had a long day, it's recovery, whatever. It's not. It's it's a long day, it's recovery of victims. And
Yeah,
now,
Ed, I try not to dwell on that
right,
when I'm still working. I
right.
try to, like I said, I talk to the people, et cetera, and act,
Yeah,
like they're, like they're still with us.
But having the
right.
concerns of staff, the students that were there that day,
Yeah,
everything
Yeah,
like that. I mean, it's not just yourself you're worried about.
right. Yeah, good point,
yeah.
John.
There's a lot,
There was a lot going on, a lot of moving
and,
pieces.
and the students are all
Yep.
curious, and I don't want to tell them, oh yeah, we brought up 20 bodies and blah blah blah.
Yeah,
It's like, it's just an accident. Yeah, were there dead people? Yeah, unfortunately, we had, and they couldn't believe that we were getting back in the water.
yeah,
They go, are you guys okay to get back in the water? Yeah, we're going to do a 30-foot dive as your last dive, and finish up your skills and stuff, and get you done.
yeah,
All right, and
yeah.
it also, I think what it did too is it took the rest of our team, especially those that had never been involved with body recoveries before, because we had some of them, kind of got their mind back on training
Right.
at
And
that
back on the
point.
students, like John was pointing out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But when we got back to the dive facility, um, I spent a lot of hours researching that vessel at night, and then figuring out, okay, how are we going to do this? And I decided that at that point we were going to make a harness system, but we're going to make it out of 5/8 inch polypropylene line, and basically a big grid pattern, and so we can basically wrap the bottom of the boat, the hull of the boat, with it. But I decided, you know what? We're not going to bring this up all at one point. We're going to bring this up in stages. We're going to bring it up to where it just kisses the surface first, as far as the roof goes. Then we're going to bring it up a little more and a little more and a little more, and eventually to the point where the gunnels are going to hit up. So how can we do that? Well, what I did is when I was making this harness system, which took me hours to braid all this, I put loops in at a high point, then just below, a little bit
right.
lower, and then all the way down by the keel on it, one on each side, so that we could keep moving bags, put the next set of bags on, lift it a little more.
Right.
Put the next set of bags underneath that, lift it a little more. Put
Right.
the next set of bags underneath that, lift it a little more, like that. And
Yeah.
you got to think about. I mean, this is a good sized boat, and it's got a deep deep hull on it. So the amount of water that it's holding, just a
Right.
tremendous amount of weight.
Yeah.
All that's got to be brought up until the gunnels, the side of the boat, is above the water, so we can start pumping it out.
Right.
So it's a lot of weight, and plus you don't want it to be doing one of those,
Right.
and get that water moving, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, we got to position bags also, so it stabilizes the boat so we don't get the tipping, on that. So it's a lot involved.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But
And John, conditions the next day, how were the conditions? Similar? Um,
Similar overall.
yeah. So not many waves, fairly calm.
Fairly calm. Was fairly warm.
Okay. Yeah, I remember it was a
It was a
beautiful
little
weekend.
cold down at the bottom, naturally,
Yeah.
because you had to go at least one thermal line.
Yeah, right.
And if you were like listening for the next, signal for what was going to happen, you kind of had to pull your hood away from your ear a little bit to hear better.
Okay.
we are actually signaling with these underwater air horns.
The air
So it
hammers,
kind of
right.
sounded like a loud duck, like that.
Yeah. Yep.
So we set up a base of signals as far as, stop, okay, go,
Right.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
But that was the other thing is we practiced with the team. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to crack the valves so far, quarter
Right.
turn. Let the air just hiss out just a little bit. So we're practicing all that ahead of time, so that when we did the lift, we want it to be perfect.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think it came up pretty good.
Yeah. And then the next show, we have some very good pictures of the vessel, just what you said in those stages, where it's just, you can just see the top of the boat, and then you see the next part of it as it's starting to come up. Then you see it as it comes up, a little bit higher out of the water, and then eventually, the gunnels are
I
out of the
think we
water.
did 3 lifts initially
Okay.
from where it was out, over 60 feet of water.
Okay.
Then I made the decision. I said, you know what? We're towing it in now. We had about maybe 8 feet or so to the bottom of the keel. And I said, we're going to tow it over into that bay where we're doing all the staging and stuff. And because that way, if anything happens, we're in 10 feet of water. It's going to
Right.
go poof and sit on the bottom.
Yeah.
Right. We don't have to worry about it rolling over. We don't have to worry about it going back down to 60 feet.
Right.
So I think we even have a picture of the sheriff's department towing the boat
Yeah.
for us
Yep.
at that point. But day 2, we had the New York State Police dive team with us, and we also had the sheriff's department dive team out there. With that, we had one of each of their divers with us in the water, and the only reason is because we don't work with these people on an everyday basis, and we want to
Right.
make sure our team is basically taking charge and doing what they're
Trained to do.
trained to
Yeah.
do and experts in.
Right.
But
Exactly.
I'll talk about that. But we've got a big cover up coming up, in the next show also. It's not all what it seems. And also, this particular vessel, this accident, if it never happened, maybe the Panama crisis with the Panama Papers in the country of Panama, where they were laundering all the money for the politicians that were crooked, stealing the taxpayer dollars and the royalty around the world through their hundreds of shell companies, laundering money. It may not have ever happened if it wasn't for this accident.
Right.
And we're
Because
going
of
to
the
talk about
insurance.
that also, and how it opened up the whole thing. I mean, eventually, all these politicians and royalty from all over the world, kiboshed it with the news, pay
Yeah.
them off and control it. But crooked.
Yeah.
Yeah, so much corruption out there. It's sickening.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about how the story changed and why it went to the port side rollover instead of the starboard side that we saw it roll over on.
Right.
Eyewitnesses. And again, we're not just any eyewitnesses. This is what we do.
Right.
You know, we work with these profile cases, and we're going to talk about why there was such a big push. And I think maybe there might have been some political pressure to make sure that it got reported that way.
Yeah. I'm
We're
sure there
having a
was.
thunderstorm right now, so you see my lights kind of flickering.
Yeah.
But
Sometimes
if I lose
you're,
power, I apologize, and I'll see everybody next show.
yeah, no problem.
But
All right. Well, then, this is a good spot to end. Like Rich was saying, we'll have part 3. And we're going to have some photos and some other things to go over. John, are you going to be available for the next show as well?
Yes.
Perfect.
excellent, good,
Good.
super. Well, thank you, gentlemen. It
Well,
was a
thank
good show.
you.
I know I get a little excited sometimes, but
No, I would
I
say
just
passionate. That's what
that's it.
that's the
I'm
right
extremely
word.
passionate about this.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thanks,
Love it.
John.
John, I appreciate it,
Thank you
buddy.
guys.
Thanks for taking time out.
And
But hey, before we go, hey,
yeah,
John, I got a question for you. You know, and it's totally up to you. I want you to think about this. We, I wouldn't mind doing a show about you, John, as far as when you had, you had a little accident here a few years ago. What is it, about 8 years now, 10 years,
It'll be coming up on 8.
8 years. And, if you're up for it, and you can tell me, no, you don't want to share it. Um, I wouldn't mind doing a show on that. Think about it. You don't have to let me know now, but think about it and let me know, because I'm sure the audience would appreciate hearing that. And especially, you were out of the country when it happened. So, and all
yeah,
the issues that we ran through trying to get you back to the mainland. But anyway, think about that, John, and we'll go from there.
yeah.
Anyway,
We can,
everybody, thank you very much for watching and listening. I'm Senior Investigator Rich Morin,
and I'm Senior
and
Investigator Ed Myron.
and we got Master Scuba Diver Trainer John Osborne with us. And John, thank you so much. And we'll see everybody next time on Underwater CSI International Revealed.
Revealed.